Adam, it's great to see you as always.
Great to see you too.
Adam and I always do these things to get together to be able to talk about the season and things that have been going on. It's been a really interesting season with some of the guests. But along with those things, there's some news that Adam has to share. So we wanted to really dig into that because it's really exciting news overall, and it really fits well with the theme of the podcast this season. Adam, tell us what's going on.
Yeah, my company, Revenue Over and Above Replacement, ROAR, was acquired by Surge. Surge is the leading firm involved in mixed use developments around sports, what we're calling sports and entertainment anchor district, or SEADs. We're launching a new platform called Smart Districts as a Service, or SmartDaaS. The idea behind SmartDaaS is to really be able to leverage multiple different data sets, put that together to really understand consumers, fans, tourists, visitors. What are they interested in? What are they passionate about? What are they spending their time, money, energy on? And use that as part of the mixed use development, both on the planning side, on the capital structure side, on the execution side, and commercialization side. So what does that mean in more direct terms is really understanding what fans, consumers, visitors, and people who live, work, and play in mixed use developments or would want to potentially move into these mixed use developments. If you really focus on what are they spending their money, time, and energy on, you could have a better sense of here are the things that we would like to develop, here are the things we would like to finance, and here are the things we'd like to build. And once those things are built, how do we better commercialize, monetize them? So how can we better attract tenants? How can we better attract people for residential areas? How can we better target people to come to these mixed use developments and leverage multiple different what are called zero first party, second party, or third party data sources to really drive that decision making, execution, and commercialization?
It's just such a cool thing, and we're all very excited for you. It's a really interesting space, and it's cool how it's growing. Along with that, as sports fans, I love those areas. As a Braves fan, the Truist Park and everything around there, obviously in Green Bay, there's such a cool thing to see. But if we take a step back, all the way back, you mentioned Revenue Over and Above Replacement. It was founded earlier this year. So
Yep.
if we take it all the way back, walk us through when you realized there was a market need big enough to build this type of company from scratch. What was really the spark in that?
Yeah, the original idea for Over and Above Replacement was on sport asset monetization. In my previous company, Block 6 Analytics, I was really focused on sports partnerships. In my experience with Block 6 and then being acquired by Excel and then just industry conversations, I realized there was a couple different areas that tended to work in silos. One was technology or platform companies. So those were companies that were really good at what they did, but were really focused on a specific solution. So typically you can think of in the partnership space, there are companies that are focused on broadcast or logo exposure in video, which is really important, right? Do people see brands and do they see either brands or branded content in video? So think of whether that's stadium signage or logos on jerseys. You have to be able to identify those logos. There's also companies that look at social media conversation. There are companies both from text-based conversation or even logo exposure in text in social media posts. So saying, is there branded content within a image, video, or within a post itself that could say that this was a brand, even if it's not mentioned by name directly in the post content or the text of the post. Then there's also companies that focus on content optimization, identifying content creators or influencers to help drive sales. There are companies that are focused on digital marketing, CRM solutions. There's all these different types of understanding consumer data, understanding the fan, understanding audience profiles. There's all these different companies. And then on the second part of it, the second vertical is in the advisory side. So you have all these technology and platform companies, and there are advisory businesses that help say not just what to do with the technology or data, but how do you help with strategic decision-making, revenue execution, content leadership, thought leadership. There are companies that work as strategic partners and advisory partners, typically from a brand consulting or a property sales. So brand consulting is helping brands enter into partnership. Property sales is really focused on selling assets. That's typically focused on properties, but that can also be on ticket sales, hospitality, merchandise, events. There are companies that help as strategic partners, as strategic advisors. And then there's also a sales element. So really focused on like actually selling these assets and how do you sell either from a business to business or business to consumer, depending on the business line. These kind of different verticals all operated separately. So my idea behind Roar is let's bring these all together. So if we could integrate multiple technology partners, integrate the advisory, have a direct sales platform, that was really the impetus to start Roar, is because our clients need all of these things, but they typically have to go to 50 plus partners to do that. As part of the build up to this and as part of the launch of Roar, and I've talked about this before on previous podcasts, I was approached by Clutch and RBC about a white paper they were talking about in mixed use developments. That white paper as we talked about, have talked about on previous episodes, and we can potentially link to those episodes in the show notes.
Yep.
But the idea is mixed use developments is probably, if not the most important or the topic that's talked the most about by industry leaders, it is certainly one of them. In the paper, we originally said it was $100 billion opportunity. I think that's a low estimate. Seregh, the company that has acquired Roar, has estimated the opportunity to be closer to $1 trillion. And Seregh's goal is to deploy across 30 different projects, $100 billion of capital. And there are more than 30 projects that we even identified in the paper. And that was focused on major North American professional sports, not even international, collegiate, or high school opportunities. So the opportunity set is much larger than the $100 billion that we originally identified. But I wrote this white paper with Clutch and RBC, and that opened my eyes to the opportunity in mixed use development. And then in conversations, once the white paper came out, John and the Seregh team reached out to me. They were interested in working together, collaborating on the concept that ended up becoming a smart district as a service. And that's how it spurred those initial conversations around the white paper, how we could work together. It was John's insight to say, instead of working together, you should build that within Seregh. And from those conversations, that's where we decided it made sense. And having the smart district as a service as the underlying technology and platform for mixed use development, but also as an underlying platform for Roar's business focused on team operation and sport asset monetization is really where we saw a substantial opportunity.
That we had an episode with John earlier this year. It's a fascinating episode. And I think it's really interesting how those things have come together, how you've built those things, not only what you've done now, but previously you mentioned Block 6 Analytics. You've done this before. When you launched revenue over above replacement, you and I have talked, it wasn't necessarily the intention to run into John. This all blossomed together. But from that, what made this opportunity with Seregh different? What made it click? What made it want to come together?
Well, I think you're right. This is almost the inverse of the Block 6 opportunity, where we spent several years putting it together and really going through. When we were acquired by Excel Sports Management, it was definitely, at the time we were acquired, it was definitely a realistic strategic option for the business to be acquired. And that was an expectation. And we had been approached by multiple companies about acquisition and decided that Excel was the best fit for the business to make it grow. This was different, right? We weren't necessarily actively looking to be acquired, or this was not necessarily as a strategic consideration. The reason we decided on both sides to do it is the fit, right? This is a perfect fit for both companies. We really, from the white paper, saw the opportunity in mixed use development. John and the Seregh team are the industry leaders in mixed use development in sports and entertainment anchored districts. That was clear from the initial conversation that I had with them. And it was very clear, just learning more about them throughout this process, that if we wanted to really build a practice that could, again, what is now Smart District as a service, Seregh is the right partner to make that happen. And on the flip side, John has really prioritized data and really understanding all of these different types of audiences that will interact with mixed use developments. There's a real opportunity from a real estate side to build out this type of platform that can have a substantial impact, certainly within mixed use developments. And that is our focus. And that is where we're going to be really emphasizing this technology and capability. But in both of our conversations, we've seen potentially an opportunity even outside of mixed use developments and in real estate more broadly to leverage this in the planning, execution, and commercialization of real estate development more broadly. And the opportunity for us to be a partner to multiple different either development, advisory, finance, construction, the opportunity to really have unique data sets, bringing these data sets together and really be a part of the process from the beginning to help drive better outcomes from mixed use developments that can drive hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue generation, and also potentially, depending on the opportunity, hundreds of millions to billions of dollars in enterprise value to these businesses. that's where we really want to focus on. And that's where the opportunity was.
You mentioned a couple of really interesting things there. You talked about the opportunity being more close to $1 trillion. Surge himself is deploying $100 billion across 30 mixed-use developments. And you talked about data. So to you, why is data the missing link in these large-scale sports-anchored mixed-use developments?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily the missing link. I think there is an opportunity to better use data because there's so much data that's going to be created. That scale of opportunity, there are so many things that are happening both inside and outside of the venues that can really be captured. And we will be uniquely positioned to capture that data, particularly the first party data that happens. So first party data is data that comes directly to an entity, or in this, if you think about it from a sports perspective, that's the teams have a lot of first party data. They also have something called second party data where they get the data directly from the partners. So if you're talking about Ticketmaster, Fanatics, technically the data starts through their platforms, but is shared with the team. So that's an example of second party data. But the teams themselves have relationships typically through either social media, promotions, campaigns, where they know a lot about their fans. From a real estate perspective, and teams will also have point of sale data when people make purchases within the venue, food and beverage data, which is, again, happens through point of sale, but also specifically oriented around what people are buying from a food, beverage, merchandise perspective. So there's just a lot of, we can edit that part out where my wife called.
Totally fine.
But there's a lot of data that's being collected, and then we're going to have data sets about these mixed use developments themselves from a residential, retail, commercial, office space perspective, community development, events. There's a lot of opportunities there that we're going to have data either directly or through our partnerships and our agreements that we will have access to. And then if you put that data set with other team data sets with the partners that we're working with, third-party data sets, and those third-party data sets can be transaction data, behavioral data, social data, survey data, clickstream data, which is being able to track people's behavior in an ethically compliant way, at least the partner that we work with, in an ethically compliant way across what they're doing in their mobile and web browser. You really can understand a lot about people in an ethical way, right? We're not looking at people like this is Bryce Clinton. We're looking at can we create personalized campaigns at scale that resonate with the target audiences, these developments.
And I think what's cool about sports fans is they are in for those experiences, meaning that they're intentionally coming to a sporting event, they're intentionally coming to those areas and doing a lot of things, interacting and transacting all those different ways so they can continue to build on that. I think the data part of it is really cool and be able to build that. A rudimentary question for me is Surge's goal the acquisition of property to build these mixed use developments, or is it the ongoing operation of them, or is it both?
Yeah, two things. One, it's not just, John makes this clear, and I think he is absolutely right about this. The goal of mixed use development is not what's happening on game day, it's what's happening on a Tuesday, right? You have to be able to drive traffic to mixed use developments, and you have to be able to have the sports and entertainment serves as anchors, obviously, particularly on non-game days, what's happening in this mixed-use developments that's going to drive foot traffic or want to make people to live, work, shop, and play in those environments. The data can be very helpful from that perspective. A good example is the Battery. Roughly, the Battery in Atlanta is the mixed-use development around Truist Park. Roughly 3 million people come to Truist Park during the baseball season, and roughly 10 million people come to the Battery in every year. So that means roughly at the very least, 7 million people are people who are not necessarily involved in the games and are not going to Braves games. So that's just, you have to be able to drive that traffic in order to get the types of returns that we're talking about. From a Surge perspective, Surge can be both the finance and development partner working across multiple different phases. So it participates directly, Surge participates directly in the financing of these developments. It can help with land acquisition. It can help secure additional capital partners, whether that's equity partners or debt partners. Surge will help to structure what's called the capital stack, or where does potentially debt and equity capital work together in order to appropriately finance and best finance these projects. It can serve as somebody who can actually lead the development in terms of Surge has just made a bunch of hires, both from an investment and development perspective, industry leaders, industry experts who are have many years, decades of experience focused on both the finance and development side. So they can help with the development, they can help with the execution. But the idea is that Surge will have both the financial resources, the human resources, and the scale to be involved from the ideation phase to the execution over a multi-year horizon to make sure that these projects are successful and drive returns for all parties who are involved in these projects.
You talked about the SmartDaaS, the platform itself. It's positioned as a customer data platform for districts, not just the venue itself. What does that actually mean for, in the end, the teams, the operators, and ultimately the fans or the people that interact in these districts?
Yeah, and again, the teams are obviously oftentimes the anchor tenants, but there are other people who are participating or have ownership stakes in mixed-use developments. The idea with SmartDaaS is, in terms of particularly on the non-game days, what are the things that should we be in the development process? When you're talking about live, work, play, shop, there's a lot of different elements that you can think about. If you think about it from a retail perspective, what are the retail locations that you should be targeting that would be most likely attractive to the people who are visiting these areas? So you can leverage data across multiple different, like all the different data sets that I've previously talked about to say, again, what are people interested in? What are they spending their money in? Where are they spending their time? And it could be, and this often can be the case, there are idiosyncratic solutions for specific neighborhoods, for specific fans. In Chicago, a good example is that the Cubs fan could be, and likely is, substantially different than a White Sox fan. So a more traditional real estate idea would be like, we have a neighborhood comps. The closest comp to the Cubs would be the White Sox and vice versa. But they are actually very different, and the areas around the stadiums are very different, even just from a lease rate perspective, and potentially a common metric in real estate is cost per square foot or foot traffic. There can be, and the demographic makeup, the behavioral, those all could be very different, even though they're both Chicago baseball teams. So the idea is, if you're going to build and think about what's happening on a Tuesday, you have to really understand what are people interested in. That SmartDaaS platform can then be helpful, not only in terms of determining what, the types of locations. And again, this would only be one input. It's not the only input. You need to leverage the experience of teams like Surge's team or your construction partners, owners, representatives, other agency partners that can be involved in these projects. But the idea is that SmartDaaS will give you a much more data forward, like, here's what the data is saying as recommendations for, again, these types of retail locations. One common example, not just in retail, but if you're thinking about restaurants, like, what are the types of restaurants that people actually are thinking about? A common consideration that teams think about is, should we use a local restaurant or a local restaurant group, or should we have national chains? And typically there can be arguments for both, but you really want to see, are people spending more of their time money and interest on national chains, and you want to potentially secure a franchise location, or do you want local restaurant options because that's where people are spending their time and dollars on? Again, that's not the only consideration, but that is a consideration that can help with the development process. Ultimately, a key metric that is typically used in real estate is something called net operating income and internal rates of return. So net operating income, particularly from a leasing perspective, is how much money are coming from the builds, either from rents or leases or occupancy rates. That's driving net operating income. And then foot traffic's another big one that we've talked about, really being able to understand, how can we drive foot traffic to these sites? If we need to have people coming here on a Tuesday, you want to build the things that they want to come to. And then from an ongoing perspective is, we want it from an internal rate of return perspective, is the faster you can drive occupancy, foot traffic, the earlier you're generating revenue, the better the internal rates of return are. In finance, we don't have to go into deep financial theory here, but in general, you want to generate revenue more quickly. A dollar generated today is worth more than a dollar generated tomorrow, or 6 months from now, or 5 years from now. So the faster you can get commitments from a leasing or residential perspective or commercial office space perspective, the better. And if you can create the things that people want or companies want, you can show that data to companies or to people as to, these are the things they want to do, or these are the places they want to be. You can provide leasing agents or people who are working to actually sell the office space, or at least provide secure tenants for the office space, secure tenants for residential spaces, whether that's high-end luxury, student housing, trying to get people, and that can be either from an owner, to buy or to lease those areas. But the faster you can get income coming in, the better the internal rates of return. The better the internal rates of return, the more likely people are going to maximize the ROI of those projects. So that's, again, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of moving pieces, but that's the idea, is that data can be used more effectively to achieve all of those goals.
What's cool from my side and from a fan perspective is there's so much that goes into this to tailor that experience to the people that are going to be there. It's not just a shot in the dark. And I think that's great news for all of us that love to go to these places, because the more they're tailored to that experience, the more we're going to not only interact with them, but consume. And I think that's an awesome thing for it. Talking about people and the people itself, you've mentioned in the past, and you've said before, people are data. How do you see that idea reshaping not just the sports business, but the entire districts that are designed to and operated?
Yeah, I think I would probably say people are people. What they do what they do, what they say, what their actions are, the data that we want to use. People are people. But one of the things that we talked about this before we jumped on the call, and I've mentioned this previously, is that the reason I'm making a distinction is I think it's really important in this context, is like people do want in real life experiences, and they do want to be around other people. Sports and entertainment, and particularly within those districts, facilitate, what Bruce Miller talked about in my podcast with him. He's the CEO of Populous and the leader, or one of the senior architects of Populous. He mentioned people want connection, and what buildings are designed to do are facilitate, particularly the buildings that they work on, are to facilitate, to design human connection. And that's a similar approach at Surge and at Roar, right? This whole idea, people want connection, people want to have fulfilling lives, they want to be better engaged with their community, they want to better engage with other people, and they want to have these interesting in real life experiences. And these mixed use development platforms combined with the sports and entertainment anchor allow for those to happen. But at the same time, right, there have been instances in the past where they haven't been as successful. And I think in part what the Battery has shown, and what many other kind of ones that we highlight in the paper have shown, is that building things that people want are more likely to achieve the success of these districts, but also make it a better experience. The whole idea is like the data can help drive a better, not just better financial outcomes, but better experiences for the people who are using those districts. And that's the whole idea. We want to have better, more fulfilling experiences that create these in real life experiences that facilitate unique experiences and human connection. And I think that's where data can really play a part, because right at the end of the day, we do want to see people as people and help use data as a way to see people as people and see what they really want, right? And build the things that people really want.
True. I have seen the same thing, from a push to those in real life experiences. We see it even in our classes. There's been a push to have people back in the classroom from the students. They want to be back in person. And you see it in this space too. And I think that's great for all of us involved. It does drive human connection. If anybody hasn't listened to that Bruce Miller episode, it's fascinating, because you think it's going to be much more about the nuts and bolts of building a building, but there's not that much about that. It really is around how those buildings are created to facilitate those interactions and facilitate the enjoyment of the people that come to those venues. And I think it's a really cool thing to see. Speaking of people, yourself, you're going to play a huge role in this. Your new role as the Chief Analytics Officer. That role kind of places you at the intersection of capital development, strategy, data and analytics. What do you think, and it may be way too early to tell, but what do you think that day-to-day looks like for you now inside of Surge?
Yeah, I think I have a dual role. Priority one is Chief Analytics Officer of Surge, and then also I'm the president of Roar. And the idea is that there's so much happening on both sides that it's going to be interesting on a day-to-day basis. I think it is going to change a lot, but from a Surge perspective, the day-to-day is the focus on the SmartDaaS platform, and how can we really leverage data to help build better mixed-use developments. And the idea is that we as Surge will have the ability to internally have these data sets, have these insights, have these platforms that can help with the development process. Externally, we can be a partner to all these different parties that I've mentioned, whether it's the teams. There's something called owners representatives, which are people who work with the teams to help determine the best strategy for these mixed use developments. There's advisory businesses, RCLCO most notably in this space, but there's a bunch of other potential, RCLCO, Machete Group. There's a bunch of other folks. Just because I didn't mention them doesn't mean that they're not experts in the space, but there's advisory businesses, there's capital partners, there's development partners, construction partners, like I mentioned before, agency partners, and Seregh will serve as the platform from a data audience understanding, audience profile analysis. Our goal is to be, if not the currency, a major currency in the industry when it comes to data and mixed use developments. On a day-to-day basis, that is what I need. That is what I will be focused on, is to making sure that data becomes a key component of every part of the process that Seregh is involved with. From a ROAR side, it goes back to the thesis that I had originally, which is absolutely we're going to be helping on mixed use development, but there's an opportunity to leverage all of this data, right? This data is not solely applicable to mixed use development. If you really understand the fan, you can better monetize. And that's the idea, is using SmartDaaS and the advisory parts of the business, the modeling, the data, the insights, all that can be helpful in partnership specifically, but how do we help teams on a day-to-day basis? Particularly these mixed use development projects can take several years to really come online. Really depends on the size and scope of those projects. But on a day-to-day basis, we can help teams monetize their assets, and not just teams. We can work with the larger ecosystem of brands and agencies and athletes and influencers and content creators. And we can also, while we are focused on sports, there's an opportunity to expand beyond sports to media, entertainment, music, advertising more broadly. So the idea is we have this platform and we have ideas for future. We have this platform, we have these capabilities, we can immediately and tangibly impact the team's business on a day-to-day basis, but also in a longer term vision, there are many, I shouldn't say teams, but teams, brands, consultant agencies, we can be partners to impact on a day-to-day basis. And then as these mixed use developments come online, again, helping to be partners, capturing this data, helping to drive and make sure that these mixed use developments are successful. If you're going to spend potentially tens of millions, hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars of capital on these mixed use developments, these need to drive value. And the idea is that our platforms can help to continue to drive value for these businesses. One of the things that is a very important topic of interest is sponsorship, both inside and outside, or sponsorship and partnership opportunities, both inside and outside of the venue, and being able to have the infrastructure from a technology, insights, analytics, and modeling perspective to really, figure out how to best monetize, particularly outside of the venue and in the mixed use developments. How can we monetize partnership and sponsorship assets? Because this opens up a whole new set of inventory that can be available for partnership and sponsorship. And we have the capability right now to help monetize those assets as they're coming online and in the development process.
You talked about this a lot. You hit on a lot of things there. But what excites you most about this opportunity now, being inside Seregh, backed by Seregh, and your dual role that you have inside of ROAR and in Seregh as well?
Yeah, there's multiple things, but I think it comes back to, what I was talking about earlier. This is $1 trillion, or we believe it's $1 trillion opportunity. To be on the ground floor of $1 trillion opportunity is very exciting, very interesting, and very compelling to me. And to be partnered with the industry leaders who are already engaged in have a strong pipeline, have projects already in the works, projects already in development all throughout the world, and being backed by the people at Seregh is backed by, including Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment, CAA, Delaware North, OVG, Liontree. On the investment committee are people from industry experts that have experience with Brookfield Properties, MSG, already having relationships in place with 17 different teams. There's Seregh having only really launched in 2024 has really taken this world by storm, and to be part of that opportunity in a real and substantial way is really interesting. And I also will say that I do think the original thesis of ROAR is also interesting, but combining the resources, the capabilities, and the opportunity of Seregh with everything we can and will be doing with ROAR, that's potentially a once in a lifetime opportunity. And that's something where I'm really excited about, and makes me even excited just talking about it. So I'm excited. Just announcement went out yesterday, and obviously we're talking about it. This podcast will come out on Thursday. Right now I'm in day 2 or post the announcement, but it's just really exciting. It's a really exciting opportunity. We said this directly in the paper. We think, this mixed use developments in sports is the most important, or one of the most important strategic opportunities in the sports industry today. The amount of money, the amount of capital, the amount of interest, and the impact that it can have on all these different stakeholders. We said it in the paper. I believe it even more strongly today. And to have the opportunity to really shape the future of mixed use developments in sports and potentially the sports industry more broadly is really exciting.
It is exciting. I'm excited about it too. I think that I'm excited to have these conversations. I know we'll have more of them going forward, not only on the podcast, but separately. I'm excited from a teaching and program perspective because, as you mentioned, it's an enormous opportunity. And part of our remit is to prepare students for things that they're going to do post the program and post their education. And it's an amazing space to be in and to be able to be on the front edge of, which you certainly are. I'm sure you're drinking from a fire hose. You said it's day 2. Those things, we'll get you out of here on this because I know there's so many things that you have to do. But for you and for Seregh and for Roar, everybody involved, I'm sure this is a nebulous question in a way and hard to answer, but what does success look like for you in the short, medium, long term?
Yeah, it is. The definition of success is what John has set out, which is investing in 30 projects and deploying $100 billion of capital. We're all oriented in that direction. And then success, obviously, when you're talking about mixed use development, success can take a long time. John and the Seregh team finding the right projects, being able to find the right partners, find the right team, continue to expand and grow. John has mentioned this previously. Roar is probably the first of many acquisitions that Seregh will make. Having this be successful already, even on day 2, we've seen a lot of success. There's a lot of interest. We've had a great reception from the rollout so far. A lot of inbound interest, which is great. That just further proves the point that this is a good idea. But I think it all orients around like Visa businesses and Seregh, Roar, but particularly Seregh has a real ability to reshape, or at least to continue to shape, the sports industry. The people behind it, the people, the companies, the technology, the partners behind it, really, and this is the right company at the right time for the right opportunity. And that's what we are oriented around. And that's what makes this a really interesting place to be. And again, one of the many reasons that I'm happy to be officially a part of Seregh.
It's exciting. I'm excited for you. I think the listeners are excited for you. It's an exciting opportunity. We appreciate you taking the time because I know, again, you're drinking from a fire hose, all these things going on. So we appreciate you taking the time to talk about it and get it out to the listeners because, again, it's a great space. It's a really evolving space. As you mentioned, we'll put the link to the paper in the show notes. We'll put the link to the press release in the show notes so listeners can see that. And then we have a lot of great content coming up in the coming weeks that'll be centered around some of these topics. Obviously, Adam will be digging into those things. So there'll be more around those. And we have some other great guests coming up as well. So, Adam, congratulations. And thank you so much for the time. And we look forward to hearing so much more about it.
Yeah, thank you. I think we do have some really great episodes coming up and looking forward for listeners to hear those. And again, appreciate you making the time as well, like to do this podcast, and really excited. And hopefully the listeners will continue to see the growth of Seregh and Roar as a Seregh company. And yeah, looking forward to having those conversations in the future.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.